The desert was a quiet kind of cruel, the kind that didn't scream. It whispered. It didn't kill all at once. It waited, patient as a buzzard on a fence post, and tonight that silence was broken by a sound nature hadn't made in decades, stone cracking from beneath the bones of a forgotten house. A jagged bolt of lightning split the sky, thunder chasing close behind. The ground trembled as wind howled through the dry canyons of southeastern New Mexico. Rain began to fall, slow at first, then in sheets. The ranch house, once proud and sun-warmed, now sat caved in on itself, wood beams rotted, roof sagging, but beneath its floorboards, in a basement no one was supposed to remember, something stirred. The wall on the north side gave a groan, then a moan, then finally, shattered. Cold air surged through the earthen room. Stone dust danced in the dark. In the corner, under rags and mold and years of forgotten time, a body twitched. Her fingers were stiff at first, like they didn't belong to her. Her eyes opened next, the whites streaked with red, lashes clumped together. For a long time she didn't breathe. Then a gasp tore from her throat, a dry, brittle sound like a paper bag crumpling in slow motion. Her name was Isadora, though no one had spoken it in 5 years. She clawed toward the light, muscles shaking, barely responsive. Her skin was cracked from dehydration, lips split, fingernails blackened with soil. When she emerged from the basement, the rain hit her like a slap. She blinked hard. The sky above was burning with stars, and in the distance a barn lantern flickered. Isadora didn't know yet who she was, not entirely. Her body knew pain, hunger, thirst, but her mind clung to fragments, silver dust on her fingers, the feel of a pen signing parchment, her brother's voice warning her to trust no one. And then, the stillness, darkness, cold hands on her arms, and thus, the face of a man she didn't recognize now standing near that flickering light. She watched him from the tree line for 3 days. He was younger than she remembered, though in truth they'd never spoken before that night. He moved with a quiet certainty, like someone who didn't ask questions and never waited for thanks. Every morning he rode out from a weather-bitten shack built just outside the eastern fence line, what used to be hers, and returned with small sacks of grain or firewood. Each evening, he approached the ranch house with something wrapped in cloth and left it on the old porch. Bread, jerky, once even a tin of beans. She never let him see her take it. His name was Elijah, though few in town knew him by anything but the boy with the promise. 5 years ago, he had been 19, working the land for a man who didn't own it. When her brother had come to him bleeding and desperate, he'd only said 5 words: "Don't let them steal it." That was enough. He'd buried her brother himself, behind the eastern ridge where the grass grew taller, said no words, no prayer, only nodded to the wind, and since then, he'd waited. Everyone else had let go. The townspeople had declared her dead. The doctor, a man paid handsomely to lie, signed the certificate without blinking. The rival landowners carved up her property with the ease of men dividing meat. Her name faded from records, from mouths, from memory, but not from his. So when she stepped onto the porch on the 4th evening, barefoot and shaking but standing, he thought for a moment he was seeing a ghost. The bowl in his hand slipped. The beans hit the ground with a soft splash. "You're supposed to be dead," he said, voice low, hoarse with disbelief. Her own voice cracked when she spoke. "I was." Neither of them moved for a long time. Rain pattered on the roof above them, slow and steady now. She looked thinner than she should have been, eyes sunken, collarbones sharp under the ragged cotton that barely clung to her. But something in her jaw stayed strong, proud. He took off his coat and held it out to her. She didn't take it. "Who buried me?" she asked, her tone sharper than her condition should have allowed. He didn't answer. She stepped past him, walking into the ruin of what had once been her home. Glass crunched under her feet. A chair lay broken near the hearth. Dust and wind had taken the paintings off the walls, the books from their shelves, but she recognized the bones of the place. In the corner, still stuck between 2 beams, was the old blade her brother used to carry. A ceremonial knife, carved bone handle, passed down from their grandfather. She pulled it free with effort and stared at it, breathing harder now. Her body trembled from the exertion, but she didn't drop it. Behind her, Elijah stepped into the doorway. "You should rest." She ignored him. "Why didn't they find me?" "I don't know. Maybe they stopped looking." She turned slowly. "And you? You just stayed?" He looked down. "I made a promise." Isadora fell silent, and for a moment she swayed like she might collapse. Elijah moved to catch her, but she threw out her arm. "Don't touch me," she whispered. That night, she slept on what remained of her father's old bed frame, curled beneath the coat she'd refused hours earlier. Elijah slept in the barn, firelight flickering against the stalls. In the morning, she stood at the ridge. The grave was there, marked with stones and a crude cross. She stared at it for a long time, then crouched, fingers tracing the letters carved into wood. There was no name, only a word. Protector. She didn't cry. Not then. Not yet. Later they sat across from one another on the porch steps, a silence between them as wide as the plains. He brought her water. She drank. He asked nothing. She offered nothing. Then, without turning her head, she asked, "Who owns this land now?" He sighed. "Bits of it. The Chavez brothers. One parcel went to a judge in Santa Fe, another's owned by the mining syndicate, Silver Star Holdings. The rest, scattered. Some folk think it's cursed." She laughed once, sharp, empty. "It is." A bird circled overhead, black against the amber dusk. "I remember signing the papers," she said. "We were going to double the rights, take the mine deeper, open new veins. We'd just negotiated the water rights with the northern pueblos. We had a plan, and then—" her voice faltered. Elijah waited. "They came at night, 3 men. I don't remember their faces, but I remember the smell, chloroform. My blood felt like it was on fire, and then, nothing. Your brother tried to stop it." She nodded slowly. "And you kept his promise." "I didn't do much. You did enough." They sat in silence again, longer this time. She watched the horizon. He watched her. Her eyes were no longer glassy. They were sharpened now, like a knife pulled from coals. "They buried me in my own house," she said, "sealed me like a secret. They thought you were dead." "No." They hoped. That night, the wind howled again, but it was different this time. It didn't mourn. It warned. Isadora stood at the mirror inside the house, brushing her hair with a bone-handled comb she'd found in a drawer. Her fingers trembled, but she forced the motion. 1, 2, 3 strokes. Her reflection stared back, older than she remembered, haunted by time. In the barn, Elijah sharpened a knife. Not the ceremonial kind, the useful kind. They didn't speak of what came next, but the air had shifted, and in the dust, something was waking. The mornings were colder than she remembered. New Mexico had always scorched by noon, but now the wind carried a bite that crept beneath her skin and gnawed at her bones. Isadora stood outside the ruined house wrapped in a wool blanket, watching the sun rise over her land, or what was once her land. It no longer felt like hers. Not yet. Elijah approached from the barn, his gait easy, unhurried, the way of someone who had learned to be silent in a loud world. He held 2 tin cups of coffee. One he set beside her without a word. She didn't thank him. He didn't expect it. The air between them was quiet but not empty. There was too much inside it. Loss, silence, guilt, memories that refused to stay buried. "I need to know what happened after," she said, voice low but certain. Elijah nodded once. He didn't speak right away, sipping his coffee like it might buy him time. Finally, he said, 2 days after your death, the doctor made it official. Judge Nolan signed off. Your land was deemed abandoned. They started the sales within the week." "Who pushed it?" she asked. "The Chavez brothers bought the south pasture. Silver Star Holdings took the mine. A couple of ranchers picked up parcels near the river. Everything else fell to paper. Legal tricks. Nobody fought back." She stared out toward the horizon, where old fence posts leaned like dying trees. "I trusted the system," she said bitterly. "My father did. My brother died believing the law would fix things." Elijah didn't respond. He didn't need to. Inside the house, they laid out what little remained of her father's estate. Weather-worn maps, brittle documents, scraps of old deeds. Most were missing. The lockbox that once held her original title papers was gone, likely stolen. But one thing remained hidden beneath a floorboard, behind a loose plank, a torn corner of a deed, singed at the edge, with her brother's name etched in bold ink. She pressed her thumb to it, feeling the faint pulse beneath the page. "This was his proof, that I owned this land outright." "He must have hidden it before they got to him," Elijah said. They rode into town 2 days later. Isadora wore a wide-brimmed hat low over her eyes and a scarf over her mouth. Elijah didn't argue. Her face might not be instantly recognized, 5 years buried did that to a person, but there were still some who'd remember. The town hadn't changed much. The general store still leaned crooked on its frame. The saloon windows still bore the stains of rain and old gunpowder. But something was different. The people moved quicker, looked over their shoulders more, like even the streets had learned not to trust too easily. They went first to the land clerk's office. An old man sat behind a desk squinting through dirty spectacles. "I'm looking for deed records," Isadora said, her voice disguised but steady. "Specifically the Chavez parcel and Silver Star Holdings." The man shuffled through drawers, pulling out thin files. "You'll need approval to view sealed records," he muttered. She slid a small coin across the desk. His fingers hesitated only a second before pocketing it. He handed over a worn folder with stamped seals. She opened it. The signatures looked forged. The approval process rushed. Several names repeated: Judge Nolan, Dr. Ortez, Elias Chavez. Each document felt like a blade pressed deeper. "These weren't legal," she said under her breath. Elijah leaned over her shoulder. "We'll need more than hunches." She tucked the files into her coat. "Then we start digging." That night, back at the ranch, they spread the documents on the table beneath the flickering lantern light. Isadora's eyes burned with each discovery. The forged transfers, the undervalued estimates, the names of buyers who had no legal CLA. Her heart beat louder than the wind outside. "Why didn't anyone fight?" she asked. "They were afraid," Elijah said. "Or they didn't care. You were gone, and gone doesn't come back." Her fingers curled into fists. "I did." In the morning they sought out someone who might still care. An old foreman, Alonzo Mendez, who once managed the mine during her father's time. He now lived in a broken trailer outside the edge of town, body hunched from years of coal dust and grief. When he saw her, his breath caught. He whispered her name like it might shatter if said too loud. "We buried you," he said, blinking tears. "God help me, I saw the casket." "You saw what they wanted you to see." She showed him the deed scrap. He stared at it like it was a ghost. "I knew your brother wouldn't let it go," he murmured. "He was stubborn, just like you." She nodded slowly. "I need proof, something solid." Alonzo hesitated, then reached into a hidden panel beneath his floorboards. He pulled out a ledger, worn, smudged, but intact. "They told me to burn it," he said, "but I couldn't. Too many lies inside." Inside were names, transaction logs, sale figures, bribes listed as consulting fees. Dr. Ortez was listed more than once. "This is everything," she whispered. "We need more," Elijah said. "Then we find Ishka." Elijah tensed at the name. "He still lives?" "Last I heard, lives off the West Ridge near the old stone trail. No one dares go near him." Isadora stood. "We dare." They rode out that night under a silver moon. The path to the West Ridge was narrow, overgrown, half swallowed by the land. Coyotes watched from the shadows. A rattlesnake slithered beneath Elijah's boot, but he didn't flinch. Isadora's gaze never left the horizon. They found Ishka's camp at the base of a rocky cliff. Smoke rose from a small fire. Animal bones hung from the trees, warning off any foolish enough to intrude. Ishka emerged from the shadows before they could speak. His face was lined like riverbeds, every wrinkle earned. One eye was clouded, the other sharp as flint. He said nothing, only stared. Isadora stepped forward. "You owe me." Ishka tilted his head. 10 winters ago, your daughter. She fell through the ice near Deadman's Creek. I pulled her out, you remember?" His jaw tensed, then relaxed. He nodded once. "I need your help," she said. "They stole everything. I want it back." He stared at her for a long time. Then, slowly, he turned and pointed toward the mountain. "Follow," was all he said. The trail was narrow, lined with stones marked by ancient symbols. He led them to a small cave, dry, hidden, protected. Inside was a box wrapped in cloth. "Left by your father," Ishka said, "before he died." Inside, copies of land maps, original mine claims, letters. Most damning, records of meetings between Judge Nolan and the Silver Star executives, notes on the nerve agent used to fake her death, even payments to the town doctor. Isadora sank to her knees. "They planned it from the start. Fear makes men monsters," Ishka muttered. They rode back in silence, the wind sharp on their cheeks. Later, around a campfire, the three sat in quiet reflection. Ishka carved a small piece of wood with her family crest and handed it to her. "Your name is not gone," he said. She stared at the carving, running her thumb along its edge. Then it's time they remembered it. Elijah looked at her, brow furrowed. "What are we going to do?" Her eyes met his. "Reclaim it. One deed at a time." The next week was fire and grit. They approached every parcel of land once belonging to her family, starting with the river pasture. The new owner, a cattle baron from Las Cruces, laughed in her face. "I paid fair and square," he said. "Don't matter if you came back from the grave." She handed him a letter signed by the original surveyor stating the sale was illegal. He tried to grab it. Elijah grabbed his wrist first. That night, the B.A. Ron packed up and left town. The pasture returned to her hands. One by one, the lands fell like dominoes. Some handed over quietly, others, less so. Isadora confronted Elias Chavez in the middle of Sunday Mass, held the ledger to his face. "This is your signature," she said. "You bribed your way into land that wasn't yours." "You got no court," he spat. "No law behind you." "I've got truth," she answered. He laughed. Until she showed him Ishka standing at her side. His silence was more threatening than any blade. By week's end, nearly half the stolen lands were reclaimed. But the mine, her family's legacy, remained locked behind steel and guarded by guns. She stood outside it now, dusk bleeding into the hills. The wind had changed again. Elijah stood beside her. "You ready?" "No," she whispered, "but we're going anyway." Behind them, Ishka adjusted his rifle, and somewhere inside the mine, men who thought they'd buried her were about to learn what it meant to awaken fire. Dawn stretched long and crimson across the high desert, casting red light over the rusted gates of the old silver mine. From her vantage point on the ridge, Isadora could see the entire valley, land that had once carried her family's blood, now crawling with men who'd stolen it with forged ink and buried truths. Below, a dozen riders paced the mine's perimeter, rifles slung casually across their shoulders. They weren't miners. They were mercenaries, paid not to dig but to keep people like her away. She adjusted the rifle sling over her shoulder. Elijah stood beside her, breathing heavy from the climb, his wounded leg wrapped tight beneath his duster. He didn't complain. He hadn't since the day they'd set the plan. "You still sure about this?" he asked quietly. Isadora's eyes never left the gate. "This is where it ends." Behind them, Ishka knelt in the shadow of a mesquite, eyes scanning through the scope of a long rifle. He didn't speak. He never did when the time came, but his stillness was its own promise. Isadora drew in a long breath. The mine had belonged to her grandfather, who had worked it with bare hands and calloused pride. Her father had expanded it, bartered water rights, laid tracks for wagons and mules, and 5 years ago she had nearly doubled its silver output through a deal with northern tribes and trading posts. That deal had been the last thing she signed before the poison took her. Now, the same mine was being stripped by strangers, every cartload of silver a reminder that her name had been erased not by time, but by design. A hawk screeched overhead, circling the ridge. Ishka lifted a finger, signaled 2 minutes. Below, the guards began to shift positions, preparing for the morning cart departure. That would be their moment, timed with the sound of iron wheels and shouted orders. Isadora whispered a prayer not for mercy, but for memory. And she descended the ridge. She didn't rush. That wasn't the way of her people. Her steps were measured, slow, as if the very land needed to feel her return before the battle began. Dust rose around her boots. Her long coat snapped in the wind. Her hand rested on the revolver at her hip. The first guard noticed her when she was nearly at the gate. He squinted, stepped forward. "Hold it," he barked. "This is private property." "I'm not here to ask permission," she said. More guards appeared behind him. One raised a rifle, another stepped toward the bell by the gate, ready to sound the alarm. Elijah fired first. The shot rang out from the ridge and struck the bell's chain before the guard could pull it. A warning, not a kill. The clang echoed across the rocks like judgment itself. Chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked through the morning air. Ishka dropped 2 men with swift, precise shots before vanishing into the hillside like smoke. Elijah picked off another from cover, then began making his slow descent, favoring his bad leg but determined. Isadora ducked behind a wagon, drew her revolver, and returned fire. She wasn't wild with it. Each shot was deliberate. One grazed a shoulder, one shattered a knee. She wasn't here for slaughter, she was here to make them feel it, to remind them that ghosts once awakened came with purpose. A stray bullet clipped her arm. She hissed, gritted her teeth, pressed cloth to the wound without stopping. Dust and gunpowder filled her lungs, but she kept moving. Within minutes, the guards had scattered. The last two dropped their weapons and ran into the hills, boots thudding on stone. Silence fell. Elijah limped toward her, blood dripping from a fresh cut above his brow. She helped him to a seat on a broken crate, tearing a strip from her shirt to press against the wound. "You all right?" she asked. "I'll live," he grunted. Ishka appeared like a shadow behind them, lowering his rifle. He nodded once. Isadora stood before the mine entrance, the wind tugging at her coat. The heavy wooden doors, reinforced with iron bands, were locked tight. A symbol, freshly painted, marked the boards. A double S wrapped in barbed wire. Silver Star Holdings. She drew her brother's knife from her belt, stepped forward, and carved a long, deep gash through the logo. Then she kicked the doors open. Inside, the mine smelled of oil and damp earth. The air was thick, the kind that carried secrets and pain. They walked carefully through the darkened shafts, past crates of silver ore and overturned carts. Workers had fled during the shootout. No one dared remain in a place that had just been claimed by the dead. In the central office, papers lay scattered. Elijah sifted through them while Isadora opened the safe. Inside, ledgers, letters, maps, and a small leather pouch marked with the initials EC. She opened it. Inside were vials, 3 of them, empty but labeled. The same nerve agent that had once been in her veins. Elijah stared at it. "So it's true. Proof," she said. "And vengeance." She didn't hesitate. She took the letters, the forged documents, and the vials, and tossed them into the mine's forge. Flames licked the paper as it curled and blackened. The truth was already known. The evidence wasn't for courtrooms, it was for conscience. Outside, the sun had risen higher. The town below would have seen the smoke by now. Whispers would already be starting. They sat together in the shade near the mine's entrance, breathing hard, stained with blood and dust. Ishka passed a canteen. Isadora drank deeply, then looked to Elijah. "You kept your word," she said quietly. He looked at her, eyes soft. "You gave me something to keep it for." A long silence settled. The mine creaked behind them like an old man shifting in bed. "Now what?" Elijah asked. "We reclaim the rest, piece by piece." "And after that?" She didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon. In the weeks that followed, word spread. The woman thought dead had returned. The judge who'd signed her death certificate fled the territory. Dr. Ortez was found gagged and bound outside the town's church with a note pinned to his coat that read, "Speak the truth or bury your tongue." Isadora made no public speeches. She issued no declarations, but every time someone tried to challenge her claim, she handed over the land maps, the surviving deed, the letters from her father. She didn't need violence anymore. The land recognized her before the law did. Children began to wander near the ranch again, drawn by stories of the woman who came back. She greeted them with smiles. Their parents watched from afar, unsure whether to be afraid or in awe. One afternoon, the town council sent an envoy, 2 men in polished boots with a contract in hand. "We can offer you 75,000, the first man said. "It's a generous sum. The mine's value has peaked. You'd be wise to sell." Isadora said nothing at first. She invited them into the house, served coffee, listened to them talk. When they were done, she led them to the barn. The doors creaked open, revealing horses newly groomed, tools aligned on racks, bales of hay stacked neatly. The barn was alive again. She turned to the men. "This is what I'm building," she said, "not selling. But the market. This land wasn't made to be sold. It was made to be held." They left without another word. That evening, Elijah worked the fence line while she watched from the porch, her brother's knife strapped to her hip. She had begun to rebuild the corral. Chickens now scratched the yard. A dog had shown up, half wild but loyal, sleeping at the foot of her bed each night. Ishka stayed for a time, then vanished. One morning he simply wasn't there, but a small wooden carving had been left by the fire pit, a auk in flight, her family's symbol. She kept it in the house, by the window. Elijah joined her on the porch, brushing dust from his coat. "Looks better," he said, nodding at the barn. "It will," Siao, she replied. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun dip low behind the ridge. He leaned back. You ever think about what they took? Every day. You ever think about what you got back? She looked at him, then down at the earth beneath her feet. It had tried to bury her. Now it held her up. I didn't get it back, she said. I earned it again. A soft breeze rustled the dry grass. Somewhere in the hills, a coyote howled. They didn't need to say anything else. By the end of the month, the ranch looked like it had never been touched by grief. But the scars remained. In the fence lines, in the trees where bullets had passed, in the quiet way Isadora still woke in the middle of the night, eyes scanning the shadows. Some wounds didn't fade. They taught you how to live. One morning, a letter arrived by Ryder. It was stamped with the seal of a governor's office. Inside, formal recognition of her land rights, legal ownership, state certified. Elijah handed it to her without ceremony. She read it, then folded it slowly and placed it inside the old lockbox that had once been stolen, now returned to its place beneath the floorboard. I don't need paper to tell me who I am, she said, but she kept it anyway. At sunset, they rode the ridge together, her on a mare named Solace, him on a gelding with a lazy eye and a good heart. They didn't talk much, didn't need to. Below them, the land stretched wide and open, hers again. And this time, no one would take it. The land tried to bury her, but she rose like fire through the soil. If this chapter gripped your soul and left you breathless, don't stop here. Like if you felt the fire of justice, comment your favorite moment or quote. Was it the quiet rage or the thunder of revenge? Subscribe for the final reckoning as Isadora takes her stand, not just for land, but for legacy.